The day Eliza Reed was sold like cattle, she made a choice that would shatter everything. In the merciless sun of Dry Creek, a woman stands on the auction block, wrists bound, body exposed, debts read aloud like commandments carved in stone. Men bid. Women whisper. But when a scarred stranger tears up her contract and declares her free, Eliza faces an impossible question. Can freedom be given, or must it be claimed? This is a story of shame transformed into strength, of a man who breaks all the rules, and a woman who refuses to be owned by anyone. If you stay until the end, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The sun beat down on Dry Creek like a hammer on an anvil. Merciless and unforgiving. Dust swirled through the square where townspeople gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed excitement. This was entertainment in a place where entertainment was scarce, the spectacle of watching someone fall. Eliza Reed stood on the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. She wore a simple cotton dress, now stained with the dust of her journey here, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Gimble, circled her like a vulture assessing carrion. Item number 7, Gimble announced, his voice carrying across the square. 1 Eliza Reed. Age 28. Strong as an ox, good with her hands, nursing, farming, cooking. Debts totaling $42, accumulated through, get on with it, Gimble, someone shouted from the crowd. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Eliza's jaw tightened, but she kept her chin lifted, her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not today. Not ever. As I was saying, Gimble continued, shooting an irritated glance toward the heckler. Debts accumulated through medical expenses following the death of her husband, Abraham Reed, and subsequent farm foreclosure. The buyer will acquire rights to her labor for a period of 7 years. Or until debts are satisfied through service. The word made Eliza's stomach turn. They dressed it up in legal language, but everyone knew what this was. She'd seen women sold this way before, seen the hollow look in their eyes when they returned to town years later, if they returned at all. A man in the front row nudged his companion. 7 years. That's generous for what she owes, depends on what kind of work she does, the other replied with a knowing smirk. Eliza's hands curled into fists behind her back, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. Show nothing. Feel everything, but show nothing. Bidding starts at $20, Gimble declared. 20. A rancher named Hutchins raised his hand. His eyes traveling up and down Eliza's figure with undisguised interest. 25. Another voice, belonging to a saloon owner from the edge of town. 30. The numbers climbed. Eliza felt each bid like a physical blow, but she remained motionless, her breathing steady and controlled. She'd learned control the hard way, nursing dying men on battlefields, holding her husband as fever took him, watching creditors strip her farm bare. Control was all she had left. $50. Hutchins called out, his voice triumphant. The crowd murmured. 50 was high for a debt auction. Gimble's eyes gleamed. $50 from Mr. Hutchins. Do I hear? The sound of hoofbeats cut through the air. Every head turned toward the edge of the square where a lone rider approached. The horse was a massive bay gelding, and the man astride it sat with the kind of stillness that suggested coiled violence. Even from a distance, Eliza could see the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hat shadowed a face marked by weather and experience. The crowd parted without a word. Jonah Calloway dismounted with practiced ease, his boots hitting the dirt with a solid thud. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. His clothes were practical, denim pants, a work shirt rolled to the elbows, a gun belt worn with the ease of long familiarity. Eliza had heard of him. Everyone in the territory had heard of Jonah Calloway. He settled land disputes with a combination of shrewd negotiation and, when necessary, brutal efficiency. Men feared him. Women found excuses to cross his path. The law respected him because he never crossed the line, but he walked right up to it, every single time. "Mr. Calloway," Gimbel said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "We're in the middle of, I can see what you're in the middle of." Jonah's voice was low, rough, like gravel under wagon wheels. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, swept over the scene, the platform, the bound woman, the eager faces in the crowd. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. The crowd felt it and grew quiet. Jonah walked toward the platform, his gaze moving to Eliza. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world contracted to that single point of contact. She saw no pity in his expression, no judgment, only a careful assessment, as if he were measuring something he couldn't quite name. "What are her debts?" Jonah asked Gimbel without breaking eye contact with Eliza. $42, plus auction fees, which brings the total to, "I'll take the contract." Gimbel blinked. "Sir, the bidding is at 50. If you'd like to," I said, "I'll take the contract." Jonah reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. He placed it on the auction table with deliberate precision. $1. For the paper itself, the crowd stirred, confused. Hutchins stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now wait just a minute. I bid 50 fair and square." Jonah turned to face him, and whatever Hutchins saw in that gaze made him take an involuntary step backward. "You bid for a woman. I'm buying a piece of paper." He turned back to Gimbel. "Give me the contract, but the debts are on the paper. Which I'm buying." For $1, Gimbel looked around desperately, searching for support, for someone to explain why this wasn't how things were done. The sheriff, standing at the edge of the crowd, simply shrugged. Technically, Jonah wasn't wrong. The contract was the binding document. If someone bought it, "Mr. Calloway, this is highly irregular, so is selling people." Jonah's voice remained level, but the words landed like stones in still water. "The dollar's on the table. Take it or don't." "But this auction is over." The crowd erupted in protest. Men shouted, women gasped, and Gimbel sputtered objections that died in his throat every time Jonah looked his way. Through it all, Eliza remained on the platform, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. This didn't happen. Men didn't do this. There was always a price, always an expectation, always something owed. Gimbel, seeing no support forthcoming and recognizing the very real possibility of violence if he pushed further, snatched up the silver dollar. "Fine. Fine. The contract goes to Mr. Calloway." He thrust the papers toward Jonah with shaking hands. Jonah took them, glanced at the writing, and then, in one smooth motion, tore the papers in half. Then in half again. And again, until the contract was nothing but confetti drifting to the dirt. "She's not for sale," he declared to the crowd, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "She's free." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Jonah walked to the platform and climbed the steps. Up close, Eliza could see the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was set like granite. He pulled a knife from his belt, she didn't flinch, and cut through the ropes binding her wrists with 3 efficient strokes. The rope fell away. Eliza's hands were free. She rubbed her wrists, feeling the blood return in painful tingles, and looked up at this stranger who had just upended everything she thought she understood about the world. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Jonah's gray eyes met hers again, and this time she saw something beneath the hard exterior, a flicker of old pain, carefully controlled. Because nobody should be bought. And nobody should be sold, but the debt was $42. "I paid 1, destroyed the contract, and called it square." He stepped back, giving her space. "You owe me nothing. Stay if you choose. Leave if you must. But you make that choice." Nobody else. Eliza stared at him, searching for the trap, for the hidden condition, for the moment when he would reveal what he really wanted. But all she saw was a man waiting for her answer with something that looked almost like respect. The crowd began to disperse, some grumbling, others shooting dark looks at Jonah's back. Hutchins lingered, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Calloway." "That contract was legal," Jonah agreed mildly. "Now it's paper scraps in the dirt. You have a problem with that, take it up with the sheriff." The sheriff, overhearing, suddenly found something very interesting to examine on the other side of the square. Hutchins spat in the dirt and stalked away. Followed by his men, Eliza climbed down from the platform on unsteady legs. Her first steps as a free woman felt strange, as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She'd expected to be dragged away in chains, metaphorical if not literal. She'd expected cruelty, or at best, indifferent use. She had not expected this. "Where will you go?" Jonah asked, his tone carefully neutral. Eliza looked around the square, at the town that had watched her humiliation, at the dust-choked streets that held nothing for her but memories of loss. She had no family left, no prospects, nowhere to return to. The farm was gone. Her husband was gone. Everything was gone, except, apparently, her freedom. She looked back at Jonah, at this scarred stranger who had torn up a legal contract and walked away from $50 in bidding just to make a point. A dangerous point. A point that would make him enemies. "I don't know," she admitted. Jonah nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. He turned toward his horse, and for a moment, Eliza thought he would simply ride away, leaving her in the square with her freedom and nothing else. Instead, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "My homestead's 3 hours north. If you need a place to figure things out, the door's open. No strings. No debt. Just." He seemed to search for the right words. "Just a place to land until you find your feet." Eliza's first instinct was to refuse. She'd learned the hard way that charity always came with hidden costs. But as she looked at the retreating backs of the townspeople, at Gimble counting his meager fee with disappointment, at the empty platform where she'd stood in shame just minutes before, she realized something crucial. She had nothing to lose. And maybe, just maybe, this man with storm-cloud eyes and a scarred face was exactly what he appeared to be, someone who understood what it meant to be trapped, and had decided to offer a way out. 3 hours north, she repeated, "give or take. Follow the creek bed past Miller's Rock. You'll see the fence line." Eliza took a deep breath, tasting dust and possibility. "I'll need to collect my things. There's time." She had one bag, everything she owned in the world fit in a single canvas sack. She retrieved it from behind the general store where Gimble had stashed it like unwanted cargo. When she returned to the square, Jonah was checking his horse's saddle, his movements methodical and practiced. He didn't ask if she'd decided. He simply waited. Eliza approached, hefting her bag. "I can walk 3 hours, never said you couldn't." Jonah mounted his horse, then extended his hand down to her. "But you don't have to." She hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was strong, calloused from years of hard work. And he pulled her up behind him with easy strength. The horse barely shifted under the additional weight. "Hold on," Jonah said simply. Eliza wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and tried not to think about the last time she trusted a man she barely knew. That time, it had ended in marriage, in love, and ultimately in Abraham's grave. This time, she told herself, would be different. This time, she was making the choice. As they rode out of Dry Creek, leaving the square and its whispers behind, Eliza looked back once. She saw the empty platform, the scattered papers in the dirt, the town that had been willing to sell her to the highest bidder. Then she turned forward, toward the unknown horizon, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and as the horse carried them north toward whatever waited at Jonah Calloway's homestead, Eliza Reed made herself a silent promise. Whatever happened next, she would never stand on that platform again. She would never let anyone bind her wrists, judge her worth, or reduce her to a column of debts and years of service. She was free, and freedom, she was learning, was the most dangerous and precious thing in the world. The landscape changed as they rode, the flat dusty plains giving way to rolling hills, sparse grass thickening into patches of green near the creek bed Jonah had mentioned. The sun moved across the sky, and neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but it was charged with unspoken questions. Finally, as the homestead came into view, a sturdy cabin with a barn and fenced pastures, Eliza broke the silence. "Why did you really do it?" Jonah slowed the horse but didn't stop. "Told you. Nobody should be bought, that's a principle." "I'm asking about the reason." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, had a sister once. Similar situation. Nobody stopped it. Nobody stepped in. She disappeared into a contract like yours and never came back." The words were simple, but the pain beneath them was oceanic. "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. "Don't be sorry. Just be free." He brought the horse to a stop in front of the cabin. "That's the only thing that matters." As Eliza slid down from the horse, her feet touching solid ground, she realized that this moment, this choice, this strange scarred man and his remote homestead, was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. But for the first time in a very long time, she wanted to find out what it was. The cabin was smaller than Eliza expected, but solid, built by hands that understood the language of wood and necessity. A single room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a loft accessible by a rough-hewn ladder. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a bedroom, sparse and functional. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone and preferred it that way. Jonah dismounted and began unsaddling his horse without ceremony. "There's a room off the back," he said, nodding toward a door Eliza hadn't noticed. "Used to be storage. I cleared it out this morning before I rode into town. You knew you were going to bring someone back, knew I was going to do something." He led the horse toward the barn. "Didn't know what until I saw you standing there." Eliza set her bag down and walked to the back door. The room beyond was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand it contained, but it had a window that looked out over a vegetable garden struggling against the late summer heat. More importantly, she noticed immediately, it had no lock on the door. Not even a latch. She turned as Jonah returned from the barn, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. "There's no lock." "No, why?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because you're not a prisoner. Never were. Not in that square, not here. You want privacy, close the door. You want to leave in the middle of the night, nothing stops you." He moved to the kitchen area and began working the pump at the sink. "But if you stay, you pull your weight. Not as payment, as partnership. This place doesn't run itself." Eliza felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she'd carried so long it had become part of her skeleton. "What needs doing?" "Everything." A ghost of a smile crossed Jonah's scarred face. "Farm's been running on spite and stubbornness for the better part of a year. Could use someone who knows which end of a hoe is which. I can do more than farm work." Figured as much, the way Gimble mentioned nursing. He filled a tin cup with water and offered it to her. "But we'll start with what's needed today and work our way forward." The water was cold and clean, tasting of minerals and earth. Eliza drank deeply, then set the cup down with deliberate care. "I'll need to see what you have. Medical supplies, food stores, the state of your fences. And that wound." Jonah's hand moved unconsciously to his left side, where his shirt pulled slightly. "It's fine, it's infected." Eliza had seen too many wounds not to recognize the signs, the way he'd favored that side when dismounting, the tension around his eyes. "How long ago?" 3 weeks. Caught a bullet breaking up a fence dispute, and you've been treating it how, whiskey and wishful thinking, despite everything, the strangeness of the day, the uncertainty of her situation, Eliza felt a laugh bubble up. It came out rusty, unpracticed. That's a terrible medical strategy, yeah, well. Jonah pulled a chair away from the small table and sat with visible relief. I'm better at taking bullets than treating them. Eliza moved into professional mode. The part of herself that had nursed men through fever and pain and the slow decay of hope. Shirt off. Let me see. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Men like Jonah Calloway didn't accept help easily. It was written in every line of his body, every careful movement designed to hide weakness. But after a long pause, he unbuttoned his shirt and shrugged it off. The wound was on his left side, just below the ribs. Someone had stitched it, poorly, and the surrounding skin was angry red, hot to the touch. Not life-threatening yet, but heading that direction with determination. You have medical supplies? Eliza asked, her fingers gentle as she examined the area. Some. Cabinet above the sink. She found a motley collection, bandages, a needle and thread, a bottle of carbolic acid that had seen better days, and yes, whiskey. It wasn't much, but she'd worked with less in field hospitals where screams echoed off canvas walls and blood soaked into dirt floors. This is going to hurt, she warned. It already hurts. It's going to hurt more. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Do what needs doing. Eliza worked with steady hands, cleaning the wound with carbolic acid diluted in boiled water. Jonah's breathing went sharp and shallow, but he didn't cry out, didn't pull away. She removed the old stitches, they'd been put in wrong, pulling the skin at angles that prevented proper healing, and thoroughly irrigated the infected tissue. You should have seen a doctor, she murmured, threading a clean needle. Nearest doctor's in Dry Creek. Wasn't going back there until I had to. Why? His eyes, gray as winter storms, found hers. Same reason you weren't eager to stay, she understood. Some places carried too many ghosts, too much history written in blood and disappointment. She began restitching the wound with careful precision, her hands remembering the motions that had once been routine. Where'd you learn this? Jonah asked, his voice tight with controlled pain. War hospitals, mostly. After that, anywhere people were desperate enough not to care that the nurse was a woman. She tied off a stitch. My husband thought it was unseemly. Said I should leave the doctoring to men with proper training. Your husband was an idiot. The bluntness startled another laugh from her. He was traditional, same thing. Jonah watched her hands move with professional efficiency. You stayed with him anyway. I loved him anyway. Eliza tied off the final stitch and reached for clean bandages. Love and agreement aren't always the same thing. He was kind, even when he was wrong. And he never, she stopped, wrapping the bandage with careful pressure. He never made me feel small. Just, limited. There's not much difference. No, Eliza agreed quietly. There's not. She finished the bandaging and stepped back, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. Change the dressing twice daily. Keep it clean. If the redness spreads or you develop fever, we'll need stronger measures. I'm here, aren't I? She met his gaze directly. You said if I stay, I pull my weight. This is part of it. Something shifted in Jonah's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that suggested one might be possible someday. Fair enough. He reached for his shirt, wincing as he moved. Can you cook? Can you eat? Point taken. The kitchen was better stocked than she'd expected. Flour, beans, salt pork, even some precious sugar in a tin. A man who lived alone but kept his pantry supplied was a man who understood the difference between surviving and living. Eliza set about making something that resembled a meal while Jonah sat at the table, watching her move through his space with the wariness of a wolf observing a stranger near its den. You'll want to rotate your crops, Eliza said as she worked, falling into the rhythm of cutting and stirring. That north field, I saw it as we rode in. You've been planting corn 3 years running. 4. The soil's exhausted. You need to let it rest, plant beans or alfalfa to put nitrogen back in. She glanced at him. Unless you enjoy watching your yields drop every season. Didn't realize I was getting an agricultural expert along with a nurse. My father was a farmer before the war. I grew up knowing dirt and seed better than I knew books. She seasoned the beans with practiced efficiency. After he died, I ran the farm with my husband until, she didn't finish the sentence. Until Abraham got sick. Until the medical bills piled up. Until the bank came calling. Jonah didn't press. Instead, he said, Northfield's yours if you want it. Plan what you think will work. I'll supply the seed. That's not how partnership works. I plan, you approve, we both work, fine. I approve, I haven't told you the plan yet, don't need to. You know what you're doing. He shifted in his chair, and Eliza saw him bite back a grimace. The wound was hurting more now that the adrenaline had faded. That's more than I can say. They ate in comfortable silence as evening shadows stretched across the cabin floor. The meal was simple, beans, cornbread, coffee strong enough to strip paint, but Eliza watched Jonah eat with the focused attention of a man who'd forgotten what it meant to have someone cook for him. Not for payment, not out of obligation, but simply because they shared a space and a meal was needed. There's a rifle by the door, Jonah said finally, setting down his empty plate. You know how to use it? Yes, good. Keep it loaded. We're remote out here, but that doesn't mean we're safe. He stood slowly, his hand pressing briefly against the fresh bandage. Had some trouble a few months back, men looking to settle old scores. Thinking I'd be an easy target out here alone. What happened? They learned different. His tone suggested the lesson had been emphatic and permanent. But they might come back, or others might try. I need to know you can defend yourself if I'm not here. Eliza thought of the auction block, of the way men's eyes had traveled over her like she was livestock to be assessed. I can defend myself, never doubted it. Jonah moved toward the bedroom doorway, then paused. Thank you. For the wound. And for staying, even temporarily. Where else would I go? Anywhere. He looked back at her, his scarred face half in shadow. That's the point. You have choices now. Even if they're all hard ones. After he disappeared into the bedroom, Eliza sat alone in the main room, listening to the night sounds filtering through the windows, crickets, distant coyotes, the whisper of wind through grass. She thought about choices, about the strange twist of fate that had brought her here, about the man in the other room who'd torn up a legal contract because nobody should be bought. She retrieved the rifle, checked its load with practiced hands, and placed it within easy reach of her small room. Then she lay down on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that came surprisingly fast. Over the following days, Eliza settled into the rhythm of the homestead with the ease of someone who'd been shaped by hard work since childhood. She rose before dawn to tend the chickens Jonah kept in a ramshackle coop behind the barn. She examined the fields with a critical eye, making notes about crop rotation and soil treatment in the margins of an old ledger she found. She reinforced the garden fence against rabbits and deer, her hands remembering the motions of wire twisting and post setting that had once been second nature. Jonah watched all of this with quiet approval, offering help when needed but mostly staying out of her way. He was a man of few words but many actions, fixing the pump when it started wheezing, bringing in firewood without being asked, riding the fence line each morning to check for breaks or signs of trouble. They developed an unspoken language of cooperation, moving around each other like dancers who'd learned the steps through practice rather than instruction. Eliza would start breakfast, Jonah would finish it while she tended his wound. Jonah would mend tack, Eliza would organize the chaos of his tool shed. Neither gave orders. Neither expected gratitude. They simply did what needed doing and left space for the other to do the same. On the fourth day, Eliza found Jonah in the barn, building something from rough lumber. She stood in the doorway, watching his hands measure and cut with surprising precision for such a large man. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up from his work. "Cradle," Eliza's heart stuttered. "You're expecting, no." He set down his saw and finally met her gaze. "But you might be. Someday. Or someone else might need it." He ran his hand over the wood, his expression distant. "My sister had a baby. When they took her. Contract included the child. Boy wasn't even 2 years old." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick with old pain and regret that had calcified into something harder and sharper. "What was his name?" Eliza asked softly. "Samuel." Jonah picked up the saw again, his movements careful and controlled. "She called him Sam." He had her eyes, green like spring grass. "I promised I'd find them, bring them home. But by the time I tracked down where they'd been taken, the house was empty. Neighbors said they'd been moved west. Then south. Then they just disappeared." Eliza understood the weight of that disappearance, the way hope curdles into guilt when you survive and others don't. "That's why you stopped the auction, that's why I'll always stop it. Every time I see it happening, every time I hear about it, I'll do what I can." He resumed cutting, the saw making rhythmic sounds in the quiet barn. "Won't bring Sam back. Won't bring Mary back. But maybe it means someone else's sister doesn't disappear into nothing." Eliza watched him work, this scarred man with storm cloud eyes who built cradles for children he'd never meet because he couldn't save the one who mattered most. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he'd done what he could, that some losses are beyond preventing. But she'd learned that comfort is cheap when it comes from someone who hasn't earned the right to offer it. Instead, she said, "Teach me to shoot better." Jonah looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You said you knew how. I know how not to shoot myself. That's different from knowing how to hit what I'm aiming at." She crossed her arms. "You said I should be able to defend this place. I want to be able to do it well." Something like respect crossed his features. "After lunch. Bring the rifle." They spent the afternoon in a clearing behind the barn, Jonah patiently correcting her stance. Her grip, her breathing. He was a good teacher, direct but not condescending, willing to demonstrate rather than just explain. Eliza found herself enjoying the challenge, the way her body learned to accommodate the weapon's weight and recoil, the satisfaction of watching tin cans explode off their fence post perches. "You're a natural," Jonah said after she'd hit 6 targets in a row. "I'm competent." "There's a difference." But she allowed herself a small smile. "Though I'm getting better, that's all any of us can do." As they walked back toward the cabin, the sun setting in brilliant oranges and purples behind them, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness exactly, that seemed too ambitious, too fragile. But peace, the quiet knowledge that for now, in this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching darkness claim the land, Jonah broke the comfortable silence. "I'm riding to town tomorrow. Need supplies before winter. You want anything?" Eliza thought about Dry Creek, about the platform and the whispers and the way the town had been willing to watch her sold like cattle. "I don't need anything from there, not Dry Creek. Miller's Gap, 2 days west. Bigger, less." He searched for the right word. Judgmental? Yeah. "Will you be gone long?" 3, 4 days if the weather holds. He glanced at her. "You'll be alone here. That sit right with you?" Eliza thought about the rifle she now knew how to use properly, the sturdy cabin with its defensible sight lines, the way she'd learned to read the land for signs of trouble. "I'll manage." "No you will." "But if you'd rather come with." "No." The answer came quick, instinctive. "This is. I want to stay. Tend the garden, keep working on that north field plan. Maybe start preserving what vegetables we've got before frost takes them." Jonah nodded slowly, and Eliza realized he'd been testing something, not her capability, but her commitment to staying. Fair enough. List anything you think we need. I'll bring it back. That night, Eliza lay in her small room and listened to the sounds of Jonah moving around the cabin, preparing for his journey. She thought about the cradle in the barn, about a man who'd lost everything that mattered and somehow found the strength to keep stopping the same tragedy from happening to others. She thought about choices, about how freedom was a muscle that atrophied without use, and how she was slowly learning to flex it again. 3 days alone on this homestead should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself looking forward to it, to the challenge of managing the space, to proving to herself that she could be trusted with something valuable, as sleep claimed her. Eliza's last conscious thought was about the door to her room, still lacking any lock, and how she no longer missed it. Jonah left before dawn, his saddlebags packed with trading goods and a list Eliza had written in careful script. She watched from the porch as he rode north, his silhouette gradually consumed by the pre-dawn gray, and felt the weight of solitude settle over the homestead like a physical presence. The first day passed in productive silence. Eliza threw herself into work with the focused intensity of someone who'd learned that idle hands invited dark thoughts. She harvested the last of the summer squash, checked Jonah's wound dressings even though he wasn't there to wear them, and spent hours in the north field mapping out a 3-year crop rotation plan that would restore the exhausted soil. By evening, her hands were blistered and her back ached, but the satisfaction of work well done carried her through a simple dinner and into dreamless sleep. The second day brought the kind of crystalline autumn weather that made the world seem full of possibility. Eliza was in the garden, wrestling with a stubborn fence post, when she heard the sound, faint at first, barely distinguishable from the wind. A cry, thin and desperate, coming from somewhere beyond the eastern tree line. She froze, listening. There it was again, clearer this time. A child's voice, raw with terror. Eliza dropped the post and ran for the cabin, snatching up the rifle without breaking stride. Her heart hammered as she moved toward the sound, every sense heightened, every lesson from Jonah's shooting instructions suddenly vital. The weight of the weapon in her hands felt both foreign and necessary, a tool she prayed she wouldn't need but was grimly prepared to use. She found the child 50 yards into the woods, huddled against a fallen log like a wounded animal trying to make itself invisible. A girl, no more than 8 or 9, wearing a dress that had once been fine but was now torn and filthy. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face streaked with tears and dirt. When she saw Eliza, she tried to run, stumbling over roots in her panic. "Wait," Eliza called, lowering the rifle to a less threatening position. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." The girl stopped, trembling violently, her eyes darting between Eliza and the woods behind her as if expecting pursuit. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They're coming back." "Who's coming?" "The men. The wagon men." The girl's face crumpled. "Please don't let them take me again." Something cold and sharp twisted in Eliza's gut. She recognized that particular brand of terror, had seen it in the eyes of women at the auction, in the faces of those who'd learned that their bodies were currency and their choices meant nothing. She closed the distance between them slowly, carefully, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. "My name is Eliza." "What's yours, Rose?" The girl's voice was barely audible. "Rose Abernathy." "Well, Rose Abernathy, those men won't get within 100 yards of you. I promise." Eliza extended her hand, palm up, letting the child decide. "But we need to get you to the house." "Can you walk?" Rose took Eliza's hand with fingers that felt fragile as bird bones. Together they moved through the woods, Eliza scanning constantly for signs of pursuit, the rifle ready in her free hand. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her pulse jump, but they reached the cabin without incident. Inside, Eliza locked the door, something she'd never done before, and set Rose down at the table. The girl was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Eliza built up the fire, heated water, and began the careful process of assessment. Rose had bruises on her arms in the shape of fingers, rope burns on her wrists, and the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd seen things no child should ever witness. "When did you last eat?" Eliza asked, keeping her voice gentle. "I don't know. Yesterday. Maybe longer." Rose watched Eliza with the wary vigilance of prey. "Are you going to sell me?" The question hit Eliza like a physical blow. "No. Never. You're safe here, that's what they said. Before." Eliza understood the weight of broken promises, of trust weaponized and turned against the vulnerable. She set a bowl of warm broth in front of Rose and stepped back, giving her space. "You don't have to trust me. But you do need to eat." Rose ate like she was afraid the food would be taken away, quick desperate swallows between gasps for air. Eliza let her finish before pressing for details, knowing that hunger satisfied sometimes loosened tongues where interrogation failed. "Tell me about the wagon men," she said finally, pulling a chair close but not too close. "How many? What did they look like?" "3 of them." Rose's hands wrapped around the empty bowl like a talisman. "The big one with the scar, he was the leader. Called himself boss. The other 2 did what he said. They had a wagon with a false bottom. That's where they put us, me, and 2 other girls. They took us from the orphanage in Miller's Gap. Said they had families who wanted to adopt us, but that was a lie." Rose's voice went flat, detached. "They were taking us south. To sell us." Eliza felt rage build in her chest, hot and righteous. She thought of Jonah's sister Mary, of a child named Samuel who disappeared into the machinery of human commerce, of all the lives crushed beneath the wheels of men who saw profit in suffering. "How did you escape?" The wagon hit a rut. "Really bad one. I heard something crack, maybe a wheel. They stopped to fix it and they were arguing, not paying attention. The lock on my compartment was loose. I got it open and ran." Rose looked up at Eliza with eyes that had aged decades in days. "The other girls couldn't get out. I tried, but the locks were too strong. I had to leave them. You survived. That's what matters, does it?" Rose's voice cracked. "They're still there. Still trapped." Eliza thought about choices, about the difference between surviving and living, about what it meant to carry guilt for circumstances beyond your control. She thought about Jonah, building cradles for children he'd never save because he couldn't save the one he'd lost. And she made a decision that would have been impossible weeks ago, back when she'd stood on that platform in Dry Creek with her wrists bound and her future measured in years of service. "Then we'll get them back," Eliza said. Rose stared at her. "You can't. There's 3 of them and they have guns and I have a rifle, a defensible position, and a very good reason to pull the trigger." Eliza stood and moved to the window, scanning the darkening landscape. "How long ago did you escape?" "This morning. Early. I've been running and hiding all day, so the men were probably still searching, moving in widening circles from where they'd lost her. They'd be cautious now, aware they'd lost valuable cargo, desperate to recover it before questions were asked. Men like that thrived in shadows, in the spaces between law and civilization where no one asked too many questions about the contents of wagons or the source of sudden wealth. "We need to prepare," Eliza said, her mind already cataloging resources and options. "They'll come looking for you. Maybe not tonight, but soon." She spent the next hour transforming the cabin into a fortress. She moved furniture to create better sight lines and cover, loaded every weapon she could find, the rifle, Jonah's pistol, an old shotgun she discovered wrapped in oilcloth under the bed. She positioned water and ammunition at strategic points, then sat Rose down with clear instructions: stay away from windows. If shooting starts, get in your room and stay low. If I fall, run for the barn and hide in the loft. There's a gap in the back wall, you can squeeze through if you need to. Head north until you hit the creek, then follow it west until you find a town." Rose's eyes were huge. "You really think they'll come?" "I think men who traffic in children don't give up easy. Eliza checked the rifle's load for the third time. But I also think they're used to their victims being helpless. That's an advantage. Night fell like a curtain, and with it came the waiting. Eliza positioned herself by the front window where she could watch the approach without being silhouetted against light. She doused most of the lamps, leaving just enough glow to see by but not enough to make them easy targets. Rose sat in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes reflecting firelight like a nocturnal animal's. "Tell me about Jonah," Rose said suddenly. "The man who owns this place, he doesn't own me," Eliza corrected gently. "And I'm not sure he owns this place so much as he tends it, but he brought you here, he gave me a choice. There's a difference." Eliza shifted position, her eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the window. "He's a good man. A hard man, but good. He lost people he loved, and it made him someone who stops other people from being lost, like me, like you." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the pop of burning wood and the whisper of wind against walls. Eliza felt her eyelids growing heavy, the adrenaline of the day beginning to fade, and forced herself to stay alert. This was when predators struck, in the quiet hours when vigilance flagged and exhaustion dulled reflexes. She was proven right around midnight. The first sign was the horses, Jonah's remaining stock in the barn suddenly restless, their nervous sounds carrying through the still air. Eliza's hand tightened on the rifle as she scanned the darkness, searching for movement in the shadows. There, a shape near the tree line, then another. "Men trying to approach under cover of night." "Rose," Eliza whispered. "Get in your room." Now, the girl obeyed without argument, disappearing into the small back room and pulling the door almost closed. Eliza took a deep breath, centered herself the way Jonah had taught her. And waited. A voice called out from the darkness. "We know you're in there, girl. Make this easy on yourself. Come out and nobody gets hurt." Eliza recognized the particular lie in that promise, the kind of casual cruelty that came from men who'd learned that threats were cheaper than bullets. She raised her voice, letting it carry. "The child is under my protection. Leave now and I'll let you keep your lives." Laughter drifted back, multiple voices finding humor in the threat. "Lady, you got no idea who you're dealing with. That girl's worth money. More money than you've probably seen in your whole life. You really want to die for someone else's property?" The word ignited something primal in Eliza. A fury born from standing on that platform in Dry Creek, from being reduced to a column of debts and measured in years of service. That child is a person. And if you take one more step toward this house, I'll show you exactly what I'm willing to die for. Have it your way. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Eliza had already moved, anticipating the shot, and the bullet buried itself in the wall behind where she'd been standing. She brought the rifle up and fired toward the muzzle flash, heard a satisfying cry of pain, and rolled to a new position before return fire could find her. The night erupted in chaos, gunfire from multiple positions, bullets punching through wood and glass. The acrid smell of gunpowder filling the cabin. Eliza moved constantly, firing and relocating, using every piece of cover Jonah's sparse furniture provided. She'd never been in a firefight before, but somehow her body knew what to do, muscle memory from 1,000 hours of tending bullet wounds translating into understanding of trajectories and killing angles. A man appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against starlight. Eliza fired twice, watched him crumple, and felt nothing but grim satisfaction. Another tried to circle around to the back. She met him at the window with the shotgun, the blast thunderous in the confined space. He fell backward into darkness, then silence, broken only by harsh breathing, hers and someone else's out in the yard. "You killed Mercer," the voice from earlier called out, anger replacing the earlier mockery. "That's going to cost you." "Good," Eliza shouted back. "Come collect the debt yourself. Let's see how that works out." But the attack didn't resume. Instead, she heard the sound of retreat, footsteps, horses, voices raised in argument fading into the distance. They were leaving, at least for now. Men like that calculated costs and benefits, and two dead companions had apparently shifted the equation away from profit. Eliza waited another hour, rifle ready, before she allowed herself to believe they were truly gone. Then she checked the fallen man in the doorway, dead, his eyes staring at nothing, and felt the enormity of what she'd done crash over her like a wave. She'd killed a man. Two men. Had done so without hesitation, without mercy, and would do it again if necessary. The door to Rose's room opened slowly. The girl peered out, her face pale. Are they gone, for now? Eliza set down the rifle with hands that suddenly trembled. They'll come back though. Bring more men. We're not safe here anymore. What do we do? That was the question. Jonah was still a day away at minimum, maybe two. Staying meant making a stand with limited ammunition and a child to protect. Leaving meant abandoning the homestead, traveling through hostile territory with hunters behind them. Neither option was good, but one kept them alive longer. We wait until morning. Eliza decided. Then we ride for Miller's Gap. Find Jonah. Bring help. She looked at Rose, at this child who'd been stolen and trafficked and somehow found the strength to run. Can you ride? Yes, good. Get whatever sleep you can. We leave at first light, but sleep proved impossible. Eliza spent the night watching the darkness, changing the dressings on minor cuts from flying glass, and thinking about the two men whose deaths now weighted her conscience. She'd ended lives, and while she couldn't bring herself to regret the necessity, she felt the fundamental shift in who she was, from nurse to protector, from someone who saved lives to someone who took them. Dawn broke cold and clear. Eliza saddled Jonah's remaining horse, helped Rose up, and took one last look at the cabin that had become her sanctuary. The windows were shattered, the walls pocked with bullet holes, blood staining the porch where one of the men had fallen. It looked like what it was, a battlefield, a place where violence had been met with violence and survival had come at a terrible cost. Will he be angry? Rose asked. About the house, Eliza thought about Jonah, about a man who'd torn up a legal contract because nobody should be bought, who built cradles for children he'd never meet, who'd given her freedom without expecting payment. No. He'll understand. They rode north through country Eliza barely knew. Following landmarks Jonah had mentioned in passing. The journey should have taken less than a day, but with Rose's smaller frame and the need to avoid open ground, it stretched into afternoon. Eliza's eyes constantly scanned for pursuit, one hand never far from the rifle strapped to the saddle. They were an hour from Miller's Gap when Rose suddenly stiffened. There. That's their wagon. Eliza followed her gaze to where a covered wagon sat alongside the road, one wheel propped on a jack. A man worked underneath it, cursing the mechanism. Two others stood nearby, rifles cradled casually in their arms. And from the wagon itself came muffled sounds, children crying, trying not to be heard. Keep riding, Eliza whispered to Rose. Don't stop, don't look back. Find Jonah. Tell him where we are. What are you going to do? What needs doing? Eliza dismounted and handed Rose the reins. Go. Now. Rose hesitated only a moment before kicking the horse into motion, disappearing around a bend in the road. Eliza watched her go, then turned back to the wagon. She had 3 bullets left in the rifle, a knife in her boot, and a fury that burned hotter than any fear. She stepped into the road where they could see her. The men looked up, surprise quickly shifting to recognition. The one who'd called out the night before, Boss, Rose had named him, stood slowly, his hand moving toward his weapon. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the stupidest. Neither, Eliza said. Just tired of men like you. Men like me keep the world running. Supply and demand. Those girls in that wagon. He gestured dismissively. Nobody wants them. Orphans, throwaways. We're giving them purpose. You're stealing their lives. We're making them useful. Vasa's smile was ugly. And you're in no position to stop us. You killed 2 of my men. That debt's going to be paid, good. Eliza raised the rifle. Let's settle accounts. The world slowed to crystalline clarity, Voss reaching for his gun, the other men bringing up their weapons, Eliza's finger tightening on the trigger. She fired once, twice, saw one man fall and Voss dive for cover. The third man got a shot off that burned past her shoulder, and she rolled, came up with the rifle empty, and charged him with the knife from her boot. They went down in a tangle of limbs and desperation. The man was stronger, but Eliza had fought too hard, come too far, buried too many people she loved to die in the dirt for men who trafficked in children. She got the knife between his ribs and felt his weight go slack. Voss appeared above her, his gun leveled at her head. Should have stayed in Dry Creek, he said. Should have, a new voice agreed. Jonah's bullet took Voss in the chest before the man could turn. He fell without a sound, and suddenly Jonah was there, pulling Eliza to her feet, checking her for injuries with hands that shook slightly despite their steadiness. You're bleeding, he said. It's shallow. Eliza looked past him to where Rose sat on the horse, Jonah's mount beside her. You came back early. Rose found me 2 miles out. Told me everything. His gray eyes swept over the scene, the bodies, the wagon, Eliza covered in blood and dust. You fought them. Alone. I had good reason. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition deeper than words. Jonah had seen the homestead, the shattered windows and bullet-scarred walls. He'd heard Rose's story. Understood what Eliza had risked and what she'd done. And in his eyes, she saw not judgment but a kind of fierce pride that made her chest tighten. Let's get those children out, he said quietly. Together they opened the wagon's hidden compartments and freed 2 terrified girls who clung to Rose like she was salvation itself. Jonah sent riders to Miller's Gap for the law while Eliza tended wounds and soothed frightened children with the same steady hands that had killed to protect them. As the sun set and help arrived and statements were given and the full horror of what Voss and his men had been doing came to light, Eliza felt something shift inside her. She'd been broken on that auction platform in Dry Creek. Reduced to debts and years of service. But here, in the dirt beside a trafficker's wagon with blood under her nails and freedom in her heart, she'd been remade into something stronger. She caught Jonah's eye across the chaos and saw her own transformation reflected back. They were both scarred now, both marked by violence and loss and the terrible necessity of standing between predators and prey. But they'd chosen to stand. They'd chosen to fight, and they'd chosen each other, though neither had said the words aloud yet. The journey back to the homestead took 2 days because Rose and the other girls couldn't travel fast, their small bodies exhausted from terror and captivity. Jonah rode ahead while Eliza drove the wagon they'd commandeered from Voss's operation. The same vehicle that had been used to transport stolen children now repurposed as their conveyance to safety. The irony wasn't lost on her. Rose sat beside Eliza on the driver's bench, unwilling to be separated after everything that had happened. The other 2 girls, Emma and Charlotte, both younger than Rose, huddled in the back beneath blankets, speaking in whispers when they spoke at all. Eliza let them be, understanding that healing took time and silence was sometimes the only language trauma knew. When they finally crested the hill overlooking Jonah's land, Eliza felt her throat tighten at the sight of the homestead. Even from a distance, she could see the damage, shattered windows, splintered wood, the dark stains on the porch that spoke of violence and death. She'd left it a battlefield, and nothing had changed except her perspective on what home meant. Jonah had already arrived and was standing in the yard, his posture rigid as he surveyed the destruction. When the wagon rolled to a stop, he came to help the girls down with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his scarred, weathered exterior. He'd always had that capacity for tenderness, Eliza realized, but he'd buried it deep after losing Mary and Samuel, afraid to invest in anything that could be taken away. I'll get the windows boarded before nightfall, he said, his voice carefully neutral. And we'll need to scrub the porch. Children shouldn't have to see that. I'll help, Eliza said. You've done enough, so have you. She met his eyes. We do it together, remember? That's how this works. Something shifted in his expression, a wall cracking just enough to let light through. Yeah. Together, they spent the remainder of the day making the homestead livable again. Jonah hammered boards over broken windows while Eliza scrubbed blood from wood with water so hot it reddened her hands. Rose helped where she could, sweeping glass and organizing scattered belongings with the focused determination of someone who needed purposeful work to keep darker thoughts at bay. The younger girls stayed inside, watching with wide eyes as the adults transformed chaos back into order. By evening, the worst was addressed. The homestead would never look the same. Bullet holes still pocked the walls, and the boarded windows gave the place a haunted appearance, but it was functional. More importantly, it felt safe, or as safe as anywhere could feel after violence had shattered the illusion of sanctuary. Eliza made dinner while Jonah tended to the horses and checked the perimeter one final time. The girls ate with the focused intensity of those who'd learned not to take food for granted, and Rose told them stories about how Eliza had fought off the wagon men, embellishing details until Eliza was practically a legend. The younger girls listened with something approaching worship. And Eliza felt the weight of their faith like a physical burden. She wasn't a hero. She was just someone who'd refused to stand aside while children were stolen. After the girls were settled for the night, all three of them squeezed into Eliza's small room because they wouldn't sleep separately. Jonah and Eliza sat on the porch in the darkness, exhaustion settling over them like a heavy blanket. "We can't keep them," Jonah said finally, his voice rough. "They need families. Proper homes, they need to be somewhere safe. That's all that matters right now." Eliza watched the stars emerge, brilliant against the black sky. "Rose wants to stay. She told me while we were traveling. She's a child. She doesn't understand. She understands that this is the first place anyone fought for her instead of selling her." Eliza turned to look at him. "You built that cradle. You said it was for someone who might need it someday. Maybe that someone is Rose." Jonah's jaw tightened, and in the dim light from the cabin, Eliza could see the war being fought behind his eyes. He wanted to refuse, to maintain the careful distance he'd cultivated since losing his sister and nephew. But she'd also seen him with Rose, the way he'd taught her to feed the chickens, the patience he showed when she asked endless questions, the cradle he'd finished and placed in the corner of the main room without comment. "I'm not good with children," he said finally. "You're better than you think." Eliza reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped a life of hard work and harder choices. "And you're not alone. We'd do it together." The word hung between them, "we," carrying implications neither had fully voiced. They'd been dancing around something since that day in Dry Creek, a connection forged in shared principle and strengthened through daily choosing. But this was different. This was naming the thing they'd been building, acknowledging that partnership had become something deeper. "Eliza," Jonah started, then stopped, seeming to search for words he'd never learned to say. "When Rose found me on the road and told me what happened, told me you were fighting alone against 3 armed men," his hand tightened on hers. "I thought I'd be too late. Thought I'd find you the way I found evidence of Mary. Just gone, disappeared into nothing. I'm here, you almost weren't." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes reflecting starlight. "You could have run. Taken Rose and kept going, left the other girls and the fight to someone else. Nobody would have blamed you, you would have blamed me." Eliza said it gently, but with certainty. "You would have understood, but you would have been disappointed. And I would have disappointed myself, that's what I mean." His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw with unexpected tenderness. "You stood your ground because it was right, not because anyone forced you. That's who you are. And he stopped again, struggling. "Say it," Eliza whispered. "I don't want you to stay because you have nowhere else to go. I want you to stay because this is where you choose to be. Because of me, not just because of safety or partnership or any other practical reason." His voice dropped lower. Because I chose you, Eliza Reed. Chose you when I tore up that contract, chose you every day since, and I'll keep choosing you until you tell me to stop. The word struck something deep in Eliza's chest. A place that had been frozen since Abraham's death, since the creditors came, since she'd stood on that platform with her wrists bound. Jonah wasn't offering protection or provision or any of the transactional arrangements she'd learned to expect from men. He was offering choice, the daily, deliberate act of staying, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I chose you too, she said, and watched relief transform his scarred face. That first day, when you offered me a place to land, I could have walked away. Found another town, another life. But I followed you because something in me recognized something in you. We're both people who refuse to look away when the world turns cruel. We're both scarred. We're both tired of losing what we love. And I think, she paused, gathering courage. I think we're both terrified of wanting something again. But I want this. Want you. Want what we're building here. Jonah pulled her close then, his arms solid and warm around her, and Eliza let herself sink into the embrace. They stayed that way for a long time, two people who'd been broken by loss learning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something whole. The next morning brought visitors. Eliza heard the wagon approaching and instinctively reached for the rifle before recognizing the occupants, Sheriff Patterson from Miller's Gap and a well-dressed woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Kathleen Morrison, head of the Territorial Orphan Placement Society. We've come about the children, Mrs. Morrison said, her tone brisk and professional. There are questions about their custody and placement that need to be resolved. Eliza felt her shoulders tense, but Jonah stepped forward smoothly. They're safe here. Fed, sheltered, recovering from their ordeal. That's all that matters right now. Nevertheless, proper procedures must be followed. Mrs. Morrison's gaze swept over the homestead, taking in the boarded windows and bullet-scarred walls. This hardly seems an appropriate environment for children, particularly given recent events where these children were rescued from traffickers. Eliza's voice was sharp. Where would have been more appropriate? The wagon they were locked in. The fate that awaited them if nobody intervened. Mrs. Reed, Miss, Eliza corrected, though the title felt strange. And I'm not questioning your authority, Mrs. Morrison. I'm questioning your priorities. Sheriff Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Now, Eliza, Mrs. Morrison is just doing her job. The law required I be sold to the highest bidder in Dry Creek, Eliza interrupted. Forgive me if I'm not impressed by what the law requires. Jonah's hand found the small of her back, a steadying presence. What exactly are you proposing? He asked Mrs. Morrison. The children should be placed in the orphanage in Miller's Gap while suitable families are found. It's the proper procedure for, no. Rose appeared in the doorway, her young face set with determination that belied her years. We're not going back. Emma and Charlotte can go if they want, but I'm staying here. Mrs. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Child, I understand you've been through a terrible experience, but Mr. Calloway and Miss Reed aren't legally authorized to. They saved us, Rose said flatly. While you and your proper procedures were doing nothing, they fought for us. Killed for us. That makes them more family than anyone else in the world. Emma and Charlotte appeared behind Rose, flanking her like small soldiers. We want to stay too, Emma whispered. Mrs. Morrison looked genuinely distressed now, caught between procedure and the obvious trauma these children had endured. She turned to Jonah. Mr. Calloway, surely you understand this is irregular. You're an unmarried man. Miss Reed's status is unclear. The homestead has obviously been the site of violence. How can I in good conscience, then marry us? Jonah said. The words dropped into sudden silence. Eliza's head whipped around to stare at him, and she saw in his face that he hadn't planned this, that the words had come from desperation rather than romance. But she also saw the truth beneath them. the willingness to do whatever necessary to keep these children safe, to preserve the fragile family they'd accidentally created. What? Mrs. Morrison blinked. Marry us, Jonah repeated, his eyes on Eliza now. Sheriff Patterson can do it. He's authorized. Then we're a married couple with a homestead and the means to provide. That solve your legal concerns? It's not that simple, actually, it is. Sheriff Patterson looked between Jonah and Eliza with something approaching approval. They're both of age, both of sound mind, and clearly willing. I can perform the ceremony right now if they're agreeable. As for the homestead suitability, I'd say anyone who'd fight off a gang of traffickers has proven they can keep children safe. Mrs. Morrison opened her mouth, closed it, then sighed. This is highly irregular. Everything about this situation is irregular, Eliza said quietly, her eyes still locked with Jonah's. But it's also right. Those children need a home. We can provide one. The law can either help or hinder, but we're going to protect them regardless. She saw the question in Jonah's eyes, are you sure about this? And answered it with the smallest nod. They'd been moving toward this anyway, she realized. The proposal was rushed, motivated by necessity rather than romance, but the foundation beneath it was solid. They'd chosen each other already. This just made it official. All right, Mrs. Morrison said finally. But I'll be conducting follow-up visits. If I find the children are in any way neglected or endangered. You won't, Jonah said firmly. The ceremony was brief and awkward, conducted in the yard with Rose and the girls as witnesses. Sheriff Patterson recited the legal requirements while Mrs. Morrison watched with skeptical attention. Eliza wore her everyday dress, still stained from scrubbing blood off the porch. Jonah hadn't even taken off his work gloves. It was nothing like the wedding she'd had with Abraham, no church, no celebration, no sense of beginning something joyful, but when Sheriff Patterson said, "You may kiss your bride," and Jonah leaned down to brush his lips against hers, gentle, questioning, promising, Eliza felt something click into place. This was real. Imperfect and improvised and born from necessity. But real. Well then, Mrs. Morrison said briskly. I'll file the paperwork in Miller's Gap. The children remain in your custody pending formal adoption proceedings. I'll return in 2 weeks to assess the situation. After the visitors left, Eliza stood in the yard with Jonah, both of them processing what had just happened. Around them, Rose and the girls played with the chickens, their laughter a sound that had been absent from the homestead until now. That wasn't how I planned it, Jonah said quietly. Did you plan it at all, eventually? Maybe. In some vague future that felt safer than right now. He looked down at her, his expression uncertain. I'm sorry it happened this way. You deserve better than a ceremony performed to satisfy a bureaucrat's legal requirements. I deserve someone who'd marry me on the spot to protect 3 children he barely knows, Eliza countered. That's better than any romantic proposal, Jonah. That's the measure of who you are. We could do it again. Properly. When things settle, things never settle. We both know that. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. This is our life now. Improvised, imperfect, constantly under threat. But it's ours. We chose it, yeah. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. We did. The weeks that followed tested that choice in ways neither anticipated. 3 traumatized children required constant attention, nightmares that shattered sleep. Fears that manifested in sudden tears or frozen silence, the slow painful work of teaching them that safety wasn't temporary. Eliza drew on her nursing experience, understanding that healing trauma was no different than healing physical wounds. It required patience, consistency, and the willingness to sit with pain until it transformed into something bearable. Jonah struggled more than she did. He didn't know how to comfort crying children, didn't understand the language of gentle reassurance that came naturally to Eliza. But he showed his care in other ways, building beds for each girl so they could have their own space when ready, teaching Rose to ride so she'd never feel trapped again. Fixing Charlotte's doll with hands more accustomed to weapons than toys, Mrs. Morrison returned as promised, her expression skeptical but softening as she observed the homestead's transformation. The windows were repaired, a garden flourished under Eliza's care, and the girls had filled the space with the particular chaos that only children could create. She interviewed each girl separately, asking careful questions about their treatment and safety. "They're thriving," she admitted to Eliza after the last interview. "Against all odds and contrary to my initial assessment, you and Mr. Calloway have created a genuine home here. We're just doing what's necessary," Eliza said. "No." Mrs. Morrison's gaze was shrewd. "Necessary would be basic food and shelter. You're doing more than that. These children love you. That's not something that can be faked or forced." After she left with assurances that the adoption proceedings would continue, Eliza found Jonah in the barn with Rose, the two of them working on repairing tack in comfortable silence. She watched them for a moment, the scarred man and the fierce girl, both survivors of losses that should have broken them, finding healing in shared purpose. This was her family now. Chosen, defended, built from the wreckage of other lives. It wasn't what she'd imagined standing on that platform in Dry Creek, wrists bound and future measured in years of service. It was better. Harder, more complicated, constantly threatened by external forces and internal doubts, but it was hers. That night, after the girls were asleep and the homestead was quiet, Eliza and Jonah sat together on the porch as had become their habit. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and beautiful, while they talked through plans for winter, crops to plant, supplies to stockpile, the endless practical considerations of keeping a family alive in unforgiving country. "Think we can do this?" Jonah asked eventually. "Raise 3 girls who've seen the worst humanity offers? Keep them safe in a world that tried to destroy them?" "No," Eliza said honestly. "I think we'll fail more often than we succeed. Make mistakes that keep us awake at night. Watch them struggle with trauma we can't fix no matter how much we want to." She leaned against his shoulder. "But we'll do it anyway. Because the alternative is standing aside while more children disappear. And neither of us can do that." "No," Jonah agreed. "We can't." Inside the cabin, one of the girls cried out in her sleep, and both adults tensed, ready to respond. But Rose's voice drifted out, soft and soothing, calming her adopted sister back into rest. The house settled into silence again, and Eliza felt Jonah relax beside her. "She's going to be fine," he said quietly. "Rose. She's got something in her that trauma can't touch." "She's got us," Eliza corrected. "That's what makes the difference." They sat in peaceful silence until the cold drove them inside, where Jonah banked the fire and Eliza checked on the sleeping girls one final time. In the bedroom they now shared, another adjustment, another negotiation of space and boundaries. They lay side by side in the darkness, not touching but present. "Thank you," Jonah said into the silence. "For what?" "For choosing this. For choosing me. For being brave enough to stand your ground when you could have run." His hand found hers in the dark. "For being exactly who you are." Eliza squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that told the story of his life. "Thank you for tearing up that contract. For seeing a person where everyone else saw property. For building a family from broken pieces." Outside, the wind whispered through grass and the night creatures called to each other in the darkness. Inside, a family slept, imperfect, improvised, held together by choice and determination and the refusal to let cruelty have the final word. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. Winter came early that year, arriving in a single brutal night when temperatures plummeted and the first snow fell in thick, silent curtains. Eliza woke to a world transformed, white and pristine and deadly beautiful. She also woke to Rose shaking her shoulder with unusual urgency. "Emma's burning up," the girl whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I tried to wake her but she won't open her eyes." Eliza was moving before full consciousness returned, her nursing instincts overriding the fog of sleep. In the girl's room, Emma lay curled on her side, her small body radiating heat like a furnace. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, and when Eliza touched her forehead, the skin felt like it might blister. "Jonah," Eliza called, keeping her voice calm despite the ice forming in her stomach. "I need you." He appeared in the doorway within seconds, already pulling on his shirt. One look at Emma and his expression went grim. "How bad?" "Fever, possibly infection. I need to examine her properly, but the light's not good enough here." Eliza was already gathering supplies, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "We need to move her to the main room, get the fire built up, boil water." They worked in synchronized silence, Jonah carrying Emma's small form with surprising gentleness while Eliza directed Charlotte and Rose to gather blankets and stoke the fire. Within minutes, the main room had been transformed into a makeshift infirmary, Emma laid out on the table where better light could reach her. What Eliza found when she examined the girl made her chest tighten with professional concern and personal fear. A wound on Emma's leg, probably from climbing through the wagon's hidden compartment during her captivity, had become infected. In warmer weather, with proper treatment, it would have been manageable. But the cold had driven the infection deeper, and Emma's small body was losing the fight. "I need to drain it," Eliza said, meeting Jonah's eyes. "It's going to be painful, and she might fight even unconscious. I'll need you to hold her steady. Tell me what to do." Eliza worked with the focused precision of someone who performed similar procedures in conditions far worse than a warm cabin with adequate supplies. She lanced the infection, cleaned the wound with carbolic acid, and packed it with clean bandages while Jonah held Emma's thrashing form and murmured words of comfort the girl probably couldn't hear. Rose and Charlotte watched from the corner, their faces pale, and Eliza made a mental note to explain later that this was what healing sometimes looked like, violent and necessary and terrifying. "She needs medicine," Eliza said once Emma was settled and sleeping more peacefully. "The infection's advanced. What I can do here might not be enough. Nearest doctor's in Miller's Gap," Jonah said, looking toward the windows where snow continued to fall. 3 hours in good weather. 6 or more in this. "Then you'd better start riding." He turned to her, and she saw the war in his expression, the desperate desire to help warring with the equally desperate fear of leaving his family unprotected. "I can't leave you alone." "Not with Emma sick and the girls frightened. "Anne, we'll be fine," Eliza said with more confidence than she felt. "The homestead secure. We have supplies. I know how to use the rifle." She gripped his arm. "But Emma needs more than I can provide. She needs real medicine, possibly surgery if the infection's reached bone. You're the only one who can get that." Jonah's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching as he made the calculation she could see happening behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "I'll be back as fast as possible." "If anything happens." "Nothing will happen," Eliza interrupted, though they both knew it was a lie. Things always happened. The world was full of dangers that didn't respect good intentions or careful planning. "We'll be here when you return." He left within the hour, pushing off into the blizzard on his strongest horse with saddlebags full of trading goods to exchange for medicine. Eliza watched from the porch until he disappeared into the white curtain of snow, then turned back to the cabin where 3 frightened girls waited for assurance she wasn't sure she could provide. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Emma's fever spiked and fell in waves, each peak bringing delirium and cries that tore at Eliza's heart. She changed dressings, administered what limited medicine she had, and kept vigil with the exhausted determination of someone who'd learned that sometimes presence was the only cure available. Rose helped with quiet competence, following instructions without question, while Charlotte stayed close to Emma, holding her sister's hand and singing soft songs in a language Eliza didn't recognize. By evening, the snow had accumulated to dangerous depths. Eliza stood at the window, measuring drifts against the fence posts, and felt worry gnaw at her composure. Jonah should have reached Miller's Gap by now, but the return journey in these conditions would be treacherous. She forced herself to focus on what she could control, keeping Emma stable, maintaining the fire, ensuring Rose and Charlotte felt secure despite the chaos. Night fell early, the world outside reduced to shapes and shadows barely visible through the storm. Eliza was checking Emma's bandages for the 100th time when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to wind or settling snow. Horses. Multiple horses, moving with purpose toward the homestead. Her blood turned to ice. "Rose," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the cabin's warmth. "Take Charlotte into your room. Stay low, stay quiet. If I tell you to run, you go out the back window and head for the barn like I taught you. But Emma, I'll protect Emma. You protect Charlotte. Go." The girls obeyed, though Rose's face was tight with the same trapped fear Eliza remembered from their first meeting. Eliza checked the rifle's load, positioned herself where she could see the door and defend Emma's position, and waited. The knock, when it came, was almost polite. "Miss Reed?" "It's Sheriff Patterson. I've got men with me. We need to talk." Eliza's mind raced. Patterson had been sympathetic before, had married her and Jonah without hesitation. But men changed when circumstances shifted, and something about this visit felt wrong. About what? About Harlan Voss. The name hit her like a fist. Voss was dead. She'd watched Jonah's bullet take him. Had seen him fall in the dirt beside his wagon. What could Patterson possibly want to discuss about a dead trafficker? "Voss is dead," she called back. "Not much to talk about, that's the problem, Miss Reed. Or should I say Mrs. Calloway?" Patterson's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. See, Voss wasn't just some random criminal. He was connected. Important people relied on his discretion. And when he died, those people got nervous about what he might have told you or your husband before the end. Understanding crashed over Eliza like a wave. Voss hadn't been working alone. He'd had backing, protection, probably from men who held positions of authority and respectability. Men who couldn't afford for their involvement in child trafficking to become public knowledge. Men who viewed witnesses as problems to be eliminated. "I don't know anything," Eliza said, buying time to think. Emma lay on the table between her and the door, vulnerable and immobile. Rose and Charlotte were hiding, but their room had limited options for escape. And Jonah was hours away in a blizzard, unaware that the danger had followed him home. Maybe. Maybe not. Patterson's voice hardened. "But my employers aren't willing to take that chance. So here's how this works. You come out peacefully, we have a conversation, and maybe, you live through this. You make us come in there. And I can't guarantee anyone's safety. There's a sick child in here," Eliza said. "She's burning with fever and needs medicine. Whatever you think I know, whatever your employers are afraid of, it's not worth letting a little girl die. That's real unfortunate," Patterson said, and the false sympathy in his voice made Eliza's skin crawl. "But this is bigger than one sick child. You understand that, don't you? Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good, the greater good." Eliza had heard that phrase used to justify every atrocity she'd ever witnessed. Slavery, war, the casual cruelty of men who measured human worth in dollars and convenience. She thought about Emma. Fighting for her life on the table. About Rose and Charlotte, hiding in the next room and probably reliving every nightmare their captivity had created. About Jonah, riding through a blizzard to save one child while his home was invaded to threaten them all. "No," she said simply, "no, no. There is no greater good that requires dead children. There's only men making choices and then hiding behind philosophy to avoid responsibility." Eliza raised the rifle, sighting on the door. "So here's my answer. You leave now, and I won't kill you. You try to come through that door, and I'll do to you what I did to Voss's men. Your choice, Sheriff." Silence stretched, broken only by Emma's labored breathing and the whistle of wind through cracks in the walls. Then Patterson spoke again, his voice flat and cold. "Boys, we're going in. Anyone inside is a threat. Handle it accordingly." The door exploded inward under the impact of shoulders and boots. Eliza fired once, twice, saw one man fall and another stumble backward clutching his arm. She rolled behind the heavy table where Emma lay, using it as cover, and kept firing with mechanical precision. Each shot was a choice: to defend, to survive, to refuse the logic that said some lives mattered less than others. Return fire splintered wood and shattered dishes, but the table was solid oak and held against the onslaught. Eliza reloaded with hands that didn't shake, her nursing training translating into steady fingers even as chaos erupted around her. She'd seen battlefield surgeries performed while artillery screamed overhead. This was just another form of triage: identify the threat, neutralize it, move to the next. A man appeared at the window, trying to climb through. Eliza shot him in the shoulder and watched him fall back into the snow. Another came through the door. She caught him in the leg. They were trying to overwhelm her with numbers, betting that she'd run out of ammunition or nerve before they ran out of men. They were wrong. Enough. Patterson's voice cut through the gunfire. "Hold fire. Everyone hold fire." The shooting stopped, leaving ringing silence and the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Eliza remained crouched behind the table. Rifle ready, breathing hard but controlled. Emma whimpered in her delirium, and Eliza laid a hand on the girl's arm, reassurance that she was still protected, still defended, still worth fighting for. "You're good," Patterson called out, and there was genuine respect mixed with the anger in his voice. "Better than I expected. But you can't win this. Even if you take down half my men, eventually you'll run out of bullets or one of us will get lucky. And then what? Those girls in the next room watch you die. The sick one bleeds out while we search the place, or," a new voice said from outside, "you leave now and maybe live long enough to regret your choices." Eliza's heart leaped. Jonah. He'd come back. She heard the distinctive sound of multiple weapons being cocked, and Patterson cursed under his breath. "Calloway. Should have known you'd show up. Yeah, you should have." Jonah's voice was winter cold, carrying the promise of violence barely contained. "Now put down your weapons and walk away. You've got 5 seconds before I start shooting, and unlike my wife, I don't aim to wound. You're outnumbered." "No, I'm not." Jonah's tone suggested he found that amusing. "You came with 6 men. 2 are down from Eliza's shooting. I've got 4 rifles on your position, courtesy of some friends who take exception to lawmen threatening families. So do the math. Sheriff. How many of your men are you willing to sacrifice to protect whoever's pulling your strings?" The silence that followed was thick with calculation and fear. Eliza could almost hear Patterson weighing options, measuring the cost of continuing against the certainty of loss. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Jonah said. "Voss is dead. His operations destroyed. And anything he might have known died with him. You go back to your employers and tell them the trail's cold. Tell them to let it go before more people get hurt. And Sheriff? If I ever see you near my property again, I won't bother with warnings." The sound of retreat, horses moving away. Men cursing and dragging their wounded, filtered through the cabin's damaged walls. Eliza remained in position until she heard Jonah's distinctive footstep on the porch, then lowered the rifle and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jonah came through the door with 4 other men, all armed, all looking like they'd seen their share of violence. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance: the destroyed interior, the wounded men Eliza had shot, Emma on the table, and Eliza herself, covered in plaster dust and standing defiant over the child she defended. "You all right?" he asked. "We're alive." Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Emma needs medicine." "Did you?" He held up a leather bag. "Doctor gave me what she needs. Antibiotics, laudanum for pain, instructions for treatment." His gray eyes swept over her again, checking for injuries with professional thoroughness. "You sure you're not hit?" "I'm sure." Eliza turned to the bedroom doorway. "Rose, Charlotte, you can come out now." "It's safe." The girls emerged slowly, their faces pale but determined. Rose went immediately to Emma, checking her with the same protective intensity Eliza recognized from watching herself in mirrors. Charlotte stayed close to Jonah, and he laid a hand on her shoulder in silent comfort. "Who were those men?" Rose asked. "People who were afraid of what we knew," Jonah said. "But they're gone now. And they won't be back." "How can you be sure?" "Because I made it clear what would happen if they tried." He glanced at Eliza. "And because your mother just proved that this family doesn't break easy, Mother." The word hung in the air, and Eliza saw Rose's eyes widen with something that might have been hope. Charlotte smiled tentatively. And Emma, still lost in fever dreams, sighed as if she'd heard and found comfort in the sound. The men Jonah had brought helped repair the door and board up the shot-out window before departing into the night. They were farmers and ranchers, people who'd worked with Jonah on land disputes and remembered his fairness. They asked no questions about what had happened, simply offered help and left with nods that spoke of solidarity and shared understanding that some things were worth fighting for. After they were gone, Eliza and Jonah worked together to treat Emma, following the doctor's instructions with careful precision. The antibiotics went in through injection, the laudanum eased her pain into quieter sleep, and within hours her fever began to break. By dawn, she was resting peacefully, her breathing normal, her skin cooling to healthy temperatures. "She'll live," Eliza said, exhaustion finally crashing over her, "because of you." Jonah guided her to a chair. "You held them off alone. Protected 3 children against armed men." "That's," he seemed to search for words adequate to the moment. "That's everything, Eliza. Everything I could have hoped for and more than I had any right to expect. I did what was necessary," she said, echoing words he'd spoken before. "Same as you. Same as anyone would, no." He knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Not anyone. Most people would have run or surrendered or tried to negotiate. You fought. You stood your ground because 3 children needed protecting and you decided that was enough reason to risk everything. That's not ordinary. That's extraordinary." Eliza looked at him, this scarred man who'd torn up a contract because nobody should be bought, who'd married her to keep children safe. Who'd ridden through a blizzard and returned with armed support because his family was threatened. "We're both extraordinary then. Or both stupid. Probably some combination, probably." He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his face from weathered stone into something almost young. "But I wouldn't change it. Any of it. The fighting, the fear, the constant threat, I'd do it all again if it meant having this. Having you. Having them." He gestured to where Rose and Charlotte had finally fallen asleep, curled together near Emma's makeshift bed. 3 girls who'd been stolen, trafficked, terrorized, and somehow found their way to this remote homestead where 2 broken adults had decided that love was worth defending with everything they had. "Stay again tomorrow?" Jonah asked softly, though his voice carried weight beyond the simple question. Eliza remembered standing on the platform in Dry Creek, wrists bound, future measured in years of service. She remembered the moment Jonah had torn up that contract, the first choice he'd given her. And she remembered every choice since, to stay, to fight, to build something from wreckage and call it home. She placed his hand over her heart, feeling it beat steady and strong beneath his palm. "I already chose," she said. "Every day, I chose. I'll keep choosing. Tomorrow and every day after." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they'd built. Outside, dawn broke over snow-covered fields, painting the world in shades of gold and white. Inside, a family slept, imperfect, improvised, forged in violence and tempered by love. Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing thaw and renewal. Emma recovered fully, running through the homestead with energy that suggested her ordeal had left scars but not permanent damage. Rose learned to shoot as well as Eliza, her young face serious as she practiced protecting what she'd claimed as hers. Charlotte's nightmares decreased, replaced gradually by dreams she actually wanted to share over breakfast. The north field flourished under Eliza's care, the crop rotation plan proving its worth in abundant yields. The homestead expanded, new rooms added, the barn reinforced, fences extended to encompass more grazing land. Rose suggested they take in more children, those who had nowhere else to go, and Jonah agreed with the stipulation that they never take on more than they could adequately protect. Mrs. Morrison visited regularly, her initial skepticism long since transformed into genuine affection. The adoption papers went through without complication, making official what had already become true. Rose, Emma, and Charlotte were Calloways now, claimed and defended and loved with the fierce determination of people who knew how easily families could be destroyed, on a morning when the air smelled of growth and possibility. Eliza stood in the garden pulling weeds and watched Jonah teach Rose to repair tack. The girl's hands moved with increasing confidence, and Jonah's corrections came with patience Eliza would have said was impossible when they first met. Emma and Charlotte chased chickens nearby, their laughter bright against the morning quiet. "You're smiling," Rose observed, looking up from her work. "Am I?" "Yeah. You do that more now." Smile without thinking about it, Eliza considered that. She'd spent so long carrying weight, grief over Abraham, shame from the auction, fear that safety was temporary and love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Somewhere in the chaos of building this family, that weight had shifted. Not disappeared, it never fully disappeared, but become bearable, distributed across stronger shoulders. "I guess I have reasons to smile," she said. "We all do." Rose tied off a knot with professional precision. "Even when things are hard. Even when we're scared. We have this. We have each other." Later, after the girls were settled for the night and the homestead was quiet, Jonah found Eliza on the porch where she'd been drawn by the beauty of sunset painting clouds in impossible colors. He settled beside her with the comfortable ease of long familiarity, his presence solid and warm. "Been thinking," he said. "Dangerous." "Yeah, well." He smiled. "I want to visit Mary's grave. Haven't been since before everything. Keep putting it off because it felt like failure, you know. Like I couldn't face her knowing I didn't save her or Samuel, and now I think I can face her knowing I saved someone. Saved lots of someones, if you count everyone who won't be trafficked because we destroyed Voss's operation. Not the same as saving Mary, but," he paused, searching for words. "Maybe it's enough. Maybe she'd understand that I did what I could with what I had." Eliza took his hand. "She'd be proud. Of what you built. Of who you've become." "We built," he corrected. "Couldn't have done any of this alone." They sat in peaceful silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Inside the house, their daughters slept safe and defended and loved. Around them, the homestead stood strong against whatever dangers the world might bring. And between them, something that had started as a torn contract and a desperate gambit had become the foundation of everything that mattered. "Stay again tomorrow?" Jonah asked, the question now ritual rather than uncertainty. Eliza smiled, placing his hand over her heart where it belonged. "I already chose, and in the choosing, every single day, they built something that couldn't be bought or sold or destroyed by men who measured worth in profit and power. They built family. They built home. They built love from wreckage and called it by its truest name, freedom, the freedom to choose, to fight, to stand together against darkness and say with absolute certainty, this matters, these people matter, and we will defend what we love until our last breath." That was the story of Eliza Reed and Jonah Calloway, two people broken by loss who learned that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to let cruelty have the final word.